In a world where two new challengers approach, and indie games are the talk of the block, this is Sick and Wired.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Sick and Wired, your weekly gaming podcast for sickcritic.com. I'm Brandon Piro. I'm here with Max.
Hi.
He is one of our editors. And Zach, he's one of our staff writers.
Yep. Yellow.
Good to see you guys here, especially since if I'm correct, you guys are both brand new to Sick Critic podcast, the Sick and Wired podcast.
I have no idea what I'm doing.
Awesome.
Yeah. It's 9 degrees outdoors, so I'm just blessed to be in here doing.
Yeah, it's not great out there.
All right. So we're going to hop right into our classic question of what have we been playing? Always an important question when you work for a publication. What have we been playing? So Zach, why don't you go first? What have you been playing?
All right. So primarily, I just finished up Onimusha Warlords, the re-release for the PS4 and multi-platform, but I played it on PS4. And it's been a super interesting experience, mostly because there's going to be a huge rush of samurai games this year, sort of notching influence from entertainment. And doing a little bit of research, I sort of figured out that Onimusha Warlords was effectively what kicked off the prior standard for swordplay in gaming. So as a precursor to God of War and Ninja Gaiden and Devil May Cry, it brought a much more cinematic approach to swordplay with more sophisticated animations. And I hadn't played it originally, so I was sort of worried that, it was just going to be a relic and I wouldn't really get it if I hadn't played it initially. But it's been super entertaining, and it does the whole fixed angle Resident Evil 2 perspective, but as anachronistic as that is, it's pretty just charming. So I've been diving into that. I've also been finally getting into the Evil Within 2. I had been put off by the original because I thought it was sort of all over the place, had some trademark technical issues via Bethesda Publishing.
God bless.
Yeah. But it turns out what the franchise needed was to rip off The Matrix, because it's a really weird sci-fi horror turn where you're entering this sort of simulation to find your daughter that constantly sort of distorts itself, and it's a lot more surreal than most AAA survival horror that comes out. So I've been really invested in that, and I'm about halfway through and excited to polish that off. Those are the two titles that I've been focusing on recently.
As someone who I gave the first the first Evil Within game a try, I didn't like it very much.
Yeah.
Would you recommend the second one, the sequel?
I could say that it is incredibly different and that I liked it a lot more. I thought Evil Within was barely worth finishing. The Evil Within 2, beyond having a lot of technical issues fixed, is a lot more generous in gameplay variety. There are sort of open world hub areas that almost give a mock Last of Us feel, but in a more sort of surreal environment and perhaps even more open. It's still sort of very goofy. I'm not sure I would call the game scary, but I do think it's a very entertaining playthrough in ways that the original sort of missed the mark.
Okay. I might have to give that a try. That's a series I've always been trying to kind of dip my toes in the water of, but it just never captured me really well.
Yeah. I do think, actually, I can't say it's as good as RE4, because that's such sort of an unprecedented watermark, but I would say that for all of the things Shinji Mikami has followed Resident Evil 4 up with, I would say that the Evil Within 2 is the best and most distinct by far, more than Evil Within 1 or Shadows of the Damned.
All right. Max, how about you? What have you been playing?
I just recently did my review of My Time at Porsche, so after I finished that up, I wanted to just dive right back into it. It's a lot of fun. It's kind of addicting. It's kind of like Stardew Valley, Minecraft, Zelda, because it starts like you inherit your not really a farm, but a plot of land from a relative, and the main goal is you want to like do all these work projects for the town because that's how you earn money. But at the same time, there's also you got to like mine up all the resources. There's dungeons you can explore. There's a whole lot to do. I'm gonna plug my review right here, but the at its core, it's kind of like its main problem is that it tries to do so much, and it is a bit shallow in places, but it's still a lot of fun. I could see myself sinking a whole lot of hours into it. And in terms of older games as well, I've actually never played a Fire Emblem game before, so recently I just booted up the first Fire Emblem to be released in the US, just called Fire Emblem for Game Boy Advance. So I'm just a few chapters into it, but it's a lot of fun so far. I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes.
And pretty soon you'll be maining the cast in Smash.
Oh yeah.
All right.
I think, like, there's more Fire Emblem in Smash than any other game, right? Like,
Yeah,
maybe
pretty much.
Mario, but I think it's just mostly Fire Emblem.
I mean, it is the Nintendo exclusive IP made up of swordsmen,
Well,
so
yeah.
they fit into Smash Bros. Very well.
Yeah, I definitely understand it, yeah.
All right. Well, on my end, I've decided I wanted to go back and kind of just take it easy for a little bit, especially since lately I've been extremely busy. But I just kind of went back to to classic sim game. I love sim games. City Skylines.
Oh, yeah.
That's a game I can easily get sick of and be like, why did I ever even start playing this? But then after a while, I'm like, oh, that's why.
Reels you back
I
in.
just need I need that control in my life sometimes.
That always offline control,
Yes,
especially.
Thank you for getting it right. Other than that, I'm not proud of this because I'm a huge fan of the Telltale games, but I made progress in, but did not quite finish the most recent episode of The Walking Dead final season.
Yeah.
Skybound really, I feel like you can immediately tell the difference though between Skybound and between Telltale. It seems a little more polished, and I think a big reason behind that is probably because Skybound isn't worrying about the same money issue, so they don't have the same constant worry of, oh man, we got to get this game out as soon as possible because we got to make a quick we got to make a buck. So you can tell they took their time with it, and while it's certainly not a masterpiece and other Telltale games have superseded it by miles, it's definitely I think it's the best episode of the season so far, of which there will be 4 episodes. But and this was episode 3. But that's pretty much it for me.
Oh, Zach, speaking of Telltale, you know when we're gonna start Minecraft Story Mode? Because like I've been looking forward to that ever since you pitched the idea.
I want to remain a Telltale fan, so I don't know if I can dive in. But you know, the movie that's coming out, the Minecraft movie that's coming out, follows the Minecraft Story Mode canon.
No way.
So
I'm starting to see there are stages of Hollywood running out of ideas.
Oh yeah, dude.
So the first stage of running out of ideas was let's just sequel everything.
Oh yeah.
The second level was, okay, now that we've sequeled everything, let's take a look back at movies that are so old now after our sequeling that we can remake it.
Yeah, they've remade The Star Is Born twice.
Then now we're in the stage
They
where
remade
it's like
Fast and Furious like 9 times.
Now they're in the stage where it's like, okay, we've done all we can do in this industry. Let's go to the gaming industry and see what they got over there. Can we turn any of that into movies? And now I feel like everything video games is a movie now. We got Sonic coming out.
It might get another it might get another kickstart because Rampage with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was the first video game movie to muster above a 50% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Applause.
Yeah.
They just got to put Dwayne Johnson in every video game movie. That's the key to success.
Don't give him ideas.
I for one like Dwayne Johnson, so I would never wish such a fate upon him.
Yeah, exactly. Him especially, and I guess sort of Wahlberg, are like those people they always wheel into movies that they don't think are going to do well, just because Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is such an approachable guy that can draw people in to seeing whatever he's attached to.
Yeah, could definitely see it. So now that we've covered that base, so if you've been listening to the podcast for the past couple weeks, we've implemented a new game called Who Said It, and the host of that one is our own Devin Pratt. He doesn't like this term, but he is the CEO and spiritual leader here at Sick Critic. But today we're going to try a different game, boys, and I'm going to be the host of it today. And so, what I like to call this game is They Said What?
All right.
So the way this is going to work is I looked on. I like Metacritic as a source, and so I looked on Metacritic and I looked at games that got above an 80, and I would say that those games that got above an 80 I would consider successful games. Good, in fact, even good games for the most part. And while I did try to steer clear of the lower end, around closer to 80, I tried to stay 85 and above. We do get some on the lower end there, but what this is I'm taking some of those games, 7 of them, and I found some quotes from critics that are less than yeah. They pretty much they didn't hate the game, but they gave a reason that was a little bit different, maybe, or something that when you think of these games, you don't think of these kinds of flaws a lot. But when you really dig into it, maybe it makes sense, maybe it still doesn't. But these are some kind of bashes on some of what are considered the best games to ever be made. And so what we're going to do is I am thinking of a number between 1 and 10, and both of you will guess to see who goes first. Zach?
7.
And
3.
The number was 8, so Zach will go first. And so, by the way, anytime I say blank, I have that is just me omitting the either the name of the game or something that would be leading, like a name of a character or something along those lines. So, number 1. This was written by the Jimquisition. I've never heard of them.
Exciting.
But the quote goes like this: "At its absolute best, blank offers some of the most absorbing experiences. Unfortunately, it makes you work harder for it than you should, buried as it is under a pile of small but constant irritations that collaborate to form a thick crust of frustration and a delectable center." So, this was either about A, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, B, Red Dead Redemption, the original, or C, The Elder Scrolls V, Skyrim. So, Zach, you're going first. I can repeat any part of the question or the answers that you need me to. What do you got?
All right. Red Dead Redemption's probably too old for the Jimquisition site, so I'm going to go with A.
All right, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Max?
Yes.
I think Skyrim.
Skyrim. All right. The correct answer is A, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild.
It was just the It was just the timeline of the site that clued me in.
Yeah, which makes total sense. Again, I had never heard of the Jimquisition.
He had written, Jim Sterling had written for Destructoid until about 2012.
Oh, okay.
And I wasn't sure if his site was off when it got off the ground.
All right, so dead unintentional giveaway there. So number 2, Zach, you got a point. You will go first on this one as well. This one was by GameCritics.com. It doesn't sound quite as cool as Sick Critic, but we'll let it slide.
It's honest.
It is.
It's direct.
It is. If I were to go there and not find Game Critics, I would be sorely disappointed. So the quote is, "Fuzzy-headed narrative and thematically irrelevant auxiliary mechanics make blank feel sloppy even when it's working. For most of its length, the game sinks towards a deflated ending rather than rising towards a climax." And this was said by GameCritics.com about A, Half-Life, B, God of War 2018, or C, BioShock Infinite.
I'm going to go with B, though I vehemently disagree.
God of War 2018, all right. Max?
I think I remember hearing similar things about BioShock, whether or not they're true, so I'm going to go with BioShock Infinite.
All right. Well, Max takes it this time. BioShock Infinite.
All right.
That is something that I've heard about, not just BioShock Infinite, but some of the BioShock games in general. Whether that's the general consensus or not, it is something that I've heard, that the story has, while the backstory and kind of lore of it all is somewhat elaborate, the actual story that you play through is a little bit disappointing at times.
It's a lot of I like BioShock Infinite, but the subtext does really tend to overshadow the central narrative.
Right, which is that's always so weird to me whenever I see a game do that, because when you have that, like you said, the subtext, you feel like they have all the tools clearly that are required to make a really good narrative, but then it just kind of slumps.
Yeah, it doesn't have anything to attach to.
Yeah, that's kind of the issue. Nothing to attach to. But so Max will go first for number 3.
All right.
This one was said by Giant Bomb. It's a little bit of a long one, so try to remember as much as you can. I'll repeat things as I need to. But we have, even though it has some interesting ideas, it's hard to get excited about yet another take on wave-based survival, especially one that uses the occasionally clumsy blank combat as its base. Once you start thinking about how most of the campaign's side content either uses these same multiplayer levels or has you perform extremely basic retrieval tasks, it's easy to start feeling slightly indignant about the whole thing. Now, this was said about A, Red Dead Redemption 2, B, Assassin's Creed Origins, or C, Mass Effect 3. Max, you have the floor.
I think I'm going to go with Origins for this one.
All right.
I think I'm going to go with C.
Mass Effect 3, all right. This was said about Mass Effect 3 in 2012, I believe. And it is something so you talk about the occasionally clumsy Mass Effect combat. That is something that I've always thought could have used, no matter how much it felt like they improved upon it. Even when we got to the third game, it felt like it was something they could have done more with, or could have done differently to make it sounder. Do you guys have a lot of experience with the Mass Effect titles?
Not enough, sadly.
I haven't played the third yet, but I had played the first. And I think just generally, even though I'm a huge action RPG fan, when you introduce that many parts, because that's what, more than I think any other genre, action RPGs are made up of parts, it can be easy for some of the mechanics to be a little undercooked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I think I think that while the combat is a problem, I think the biggest disappointment, and I couldn't find there wasn't a quote from Giant Bomb really on it, but the ending is probably when people think of Mass Effect 3, that's the biggest eye
Yeah,
popping thing that people hated.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
even I
and
heard
did
about that.
yeah, and did they sort of undo it with an update or DLC, or is that just a rumor?
Um, that's a good question. I don't know when that would have been. I never heard of a DLC that did that, but if it did, I'd like to play it. But I never took huge issue as much as everyone else did with the ending of it. So I'm satisfied either way.
Yeah, at least pre Andromeda.
Yeah, that's a whole other fish to fry.
Yeah,
Um, looks like BioWare fried it for us though.
yeah.
So Zach with another point. We're gonna move on to 4. This was said by Polygon.
Oh boy.
In so many important ways, its world design, its pacing, the technology powering it, blank falls short of the mark. If you play or no, do you play for the joy and stress of exploring dangerous, intricately crafted places full of hidden elements and endless side paths? Then I suspect you'll join me in being a little let down with the direction this sequel has gone in. Now, this was about A, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, B, Dark Souls 3, or C, Just Cause 4.
I'm gonna go with A.
A, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Max?
I'll go with Dark Souls.
Dark Souls, alright. Max takes another one. Dark
All right.
Souls 3.
Oh,
The Dark Souls series is one that I haven't played, but I want to. And I'm starting off with the remastered Dark Souls for the Switch.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's a good game that I can kind of carry around with me
Oh,
and
yeah,
chip
for
away
sure.
at.
And
But any insight on that? I mean, that's the blatant Polygon blatantly attacking kind of their kind of something that Dark Souls is known to be pretty good at. With their the dangerous, intricately crafted places full of hidden elements and endless side paths.
well, I think the methodical design of Dark Souls can be incredibly alienating to certain players, but it's also sort of inherent to the franchise. It is one of those games, at least in my experience, that you really have to pace out because it does not lay anything down easily for you.
Mm.
yeah, I haven't played Dark Souls 3, but for what I know about the series, it is definitely the kind of game where you'd want to take it slow and just kind of like I'd imagine the reviewer kind of just played it all at once because you don't get games that much before you want to get the reviews out. So I'd imagine that might not have been the most flattering way to play a Dark Souls game.
Yeah, yeah.
Definitely.
I think, I think the quick turnaround of reviews, especially from major outlets, can kind of do a disservice to more mechanically oriented games like hack and slash games, where maybe the encounters are sort of repetitive, just to make it so you sort of learn and upgrade the mechanics.
Okay. I wanted to ask you guys specifically on this question because what do you guys think of something that that most critics do, and I can never stand it, and I go back and forth in my mind, but sometimes, but I almost always end up landing on the idea that I don't like rating a game based on. I don't like rating a game based on its predecessor,
Oh yeah.
saying, "Oh well, it fell short of what the game before it did in this way, so I'm going to give it a super low score." I'm like, "Well, hold on. Like, maybe it didn't live up to the second one or third one or whatever one you're talking about, but was it a bad game because of that?"
I especially think that's an issue if they're sort of lobbing critique at the entry not being another huge step forward for the franchise.
Right.
I do think that a franchise entry can sort of ruin its own narrative, or kind of have some of its gameplay mechanics devolve, which is something to consider. But I also do see a lot of instances where you have a landmark title in a franchise, and then the next one inevitably can't offer that sort of revolution so much as just another solid gaming experience. And I think there is a disproportionate penalty given to that.
Yeah. I would agree.
Yeah, on the one hand, there's like a certain amount of stuff that sequels are expected to do, but on the other, like if it's still a good game, it doesn't have to be like a perfect sequel to still get a good score.
Yeah.
Like Phantom Hourglass wouldn't live up to Wind Waker, but I still think it's a fine game. I wouldn't just bash it for not being Wind Waker.
Yeah. I do think that there is a case to be made for if a game sort of damages its narrative or is sort of a step backwards in gameplay mechanics. But I think that, you know, a lot of game release is contextual in terms of like a game being revolutionary, and I think people too easily kind of assume that lightning can strike twice and penalize titles when it doesn't.
Oh yeah.
Well, I kind of like what you were saying. Either the biggest issue I get is when lightning does strike twice, but just because it wasn't stronger lightning, it's suddenly a worse game. Like you were saying, it did just because it didn't make this huge graphical bound, or it didn't quite. It kept very similar gameplay mechanics, and then it gets penalized for that. And I'm thinking in my mind, well, you know, you can have a game that has very similar aspects and plays very much the same. In fact, that's what I think ultimately that's the goal of any sequel, to try and make it play as similarly as possible while still trying to improve it. But at the very least, if it doesn't hit the mark on improving it, then it's just the same. It doesn't go down a notch because you were expecting it to suddenly make this huge jump and change the way that you thought about the game forever in the game series.
Especially because, and I think it especially applies to game franchises that fill a very specific need, because Hitman 2 generally got a pretty good reception, but a lot of people, a vocal group of people sort of lobbied the complaint that, oh, it's very similar to the preceding entry, when there is a specific sort of methodical, open-ended stealth approach provided by Hitman that I don't think is provided by other franchises. So if the game sticks to its guns in terms of those conceits and constraints, I think it's mostly just fulfilling why people follow the franchise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. All right, let's go on to number 5. Max, you took that one. Dark Souls 3 by Polygon. So number 5, this one is by GameSpot, and it says interaction with non-playable characters, NPCs, is a bit disappointing. Most of the non-playable characters in blank aren't big on conversation and run around blithely and inconsequentially. That is either from A, Borderlands, B, Fallout, or C, We Happy Few? And when I was doing this question, I was coming up with the non-correct answers. I was very fascinated by actually how well I feel like this can fit just about any of
Yeah,
these
definitely.
answers.
So I know Borderlands and Fallout both like they're kind of built on NPC interactions. I can't say though how well other people would have like related to them. So this is Fallout would be Fallout 1, right? You're talking about?
Yes, this is the original Fallout, original Borderlands, and then We Happy Few, which released just last year.
I think I'm gonna actually go with Fallout here.
I'm gonna go with Borderlands.
Borderlands. So the answer here is Fallout.
All right.
And
Oh,
I
cool.
played a little bit of the original Fallout, not a ton of it, but a little bit. And I don't know, the NPCs seemed I liked them in the game. There seemed to be a pretty nice variety there. I felt like there were a lot of different types of people you could interact with.
Yeah, and it seems like a bizarre critique, because I think that Fallout, when it was isometric, was when it was probably a more subtle and to the greatest extent a role-playing and conversation-driven game.
Yeah, I've always from what little I did play of the original, I felt like something that doesn't get in the way of you enjoying the dialogue between NPCs is the voice acting, because I felt like the voice acting in a lot of the Fallout games has really been choppy, like really good in these areas, but then in these areas it's like, what the hell happened?
Yeah.
But that doesn't get in the way of Fallout, because I've always thought that Fallout games were fairly well written, but the performances weren't quite there.
Yeah, I think that's a problem with making a game that's so open-ended, especially in Fallout 4, where things like your character names are spoken. There has to be sort of a compromise there, unfortunately.
Yeah, they actually handled that in Final Fantasy X just by having no character ever address the player character by name, because you can change it.
Yeah.
So like either avoid it entirely or just call him Buddy or some similar kind of friendlier name.
I liked the way Mass Effect did it, where you can so you can name you can get your first name, but everyone's last name is going to be Shepard, and so you're just always referred to as Commander Shepard. Good. Or Captain Shepard, whatever it be.
I also like the South Park RPG, where you enter your name and it immediately just changes it to something perverse for Cartman to call you.
That's pretty good. That's up there too. That might be better.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
All right. So Max jumps out to a lead, 3-2. He'll answer number 6 first. This is a shorter one. Like watching waves on a beach, chances are that pretty soon you'll tire of the lack of variety on offer. This was by Yahoo.
Wow.
I know, they do game reviews. And this was about A, The Sims, the original one, B, the original Civilization, or C, the original Animal Crossing.
Okay, those are quite the options. Oh man,
Lack of variety.
Yeah, that's the big one. So, as much as I like Animal Crossing, I think I'm gonna say Animal Crossing.
Just because of the metaphor, which may fail me, I'm gonna go with Civilization.
And that metaphor would make would make a lot more sense. But it's actually The Sims.
Really?
Oh shoot.
Which I think that this was a very unpopular opinion. I think a ton of, in fact, if I remember correctly, this is one of Metacritic's must play games.
Yeah.
Over history. This game came out to extremely high praise, and Yahoo is definitely in the minority here.
Mm-hmm.
Big shot.
Sam write this or what?
Again, I love sim games, so I've always enjoyed The Sims.
Yeah.
Really well. But all right, so no points there. Still 3-2. Max, you'll keep the power of going first on this last question before we jump into our main topic for the day. So the quote is by a publication called Quarter to Three, and it reads, "There's no risk of failure in a game like this. There's only the risk of having to play the same section yet again. In a survival game, that's an anathema. A word. A survival game without meaningful death isn't a survival game. It's just a game. This is about A, Resident Evil 5, B, The Evil Within, the original, or C, The Last of Us."
I do not play a lot of horror games. I've actually have very little experience with any of these.
This is an issue. This idea of just having to play again.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it could fit so many, and I feel like the complaining about this would be kind of, unfair. I mean, how else did they want to punish someone?
Yeah, how else does a game operate?
Other than replay it.
Yeah. And it's also a criticism that's very reliant on player scale.
That's true. Very true. All right. Max?
I'm going to go with Evil Within.
All right, I'm going with C, Last of Us.
And looks like Zach will tie it up 3-3.
Wow, teamwork.
The Last of Us. The Last of Us. I don't know. Again, the issue of how else do you make it. I guess it's just hard to see exactly what Quarter to Three in this case would want.
Yeah, and I think not to take away from the game, rather to take away from how it was received. I think the reception of The Last of Us being a survival game is a bit of a misnomer just because of how narrative sanctioned the game is.
Yeah, I would agree.
I think
I did read that, and I was kind of like, survival. Yeah, I don't know, but nonetheless.
Yeah, because I think even going back to it, The Evil Within 2, in its open expanse areas, is more of a survival game than The Last of Us. I think The Last of Us is ultimately by design an A to Z narrative.
Yeah, it definitely is. I can see how it could be known as a survival game, but there's certain aspects of survival game. Most survival games, when I think of a survival game, I think more of like maybe Doom.
Yeah,
as total survival written all over it.
Minecraft.
This idea of just being that's a different type of survival.
Yeah,
that's survival against the elements.
Yeah,
for the most part.
Yeah.
Or there's
I guess I guess at nighttime it does kind of flop there into the other subgenre.
Survival horror.
Or there's an entire genre of sort of disaster survival games that have a pretty dedicated following in Japan, but haven't really made it over to US. I actually reviewed the pretty much one of two of those games that managed to make it to the US, and for the site Raw Danger, and that is a game that's a bit more open-ended and has features like the fact that you can die from dehydration or starvation. But then again, ultimately, separate from those mechanics, what you do when dying from those is you start the section back over. So I think it's sort of an inescapable criticism, given in the confines of current game design.
I think it's safe to say that whoever wrote this, they are not going to find a perfect survival game.
Yeah.
Because that's just how video
it would have
games
to just
work.
it would have to just end.
Yeah, exactly.
Which would be insane for if it was a lengthy game. Like imagine being 8 hours into a game and just having completely back to square one.
Yeah, it's like imagine Dark Souls. You're going through Dark Souls and all of a sudden you die once and then you gotta just shoot. Well, I guess I gotta fight every single one again.
Yeah, I guess
Woe is me.
It's probably some roguelike games probably satisfy that. But they're designed around different constraints than The Last of Us.
Yeah. And a lot of roguelikes will typically offer a sort of progression, like you die but you keep a certain amount of stuff or your stats go up even though you die, which allows you to get further each time.
Yeah, so I think
it's still not the perfect if you die you start over.
Some sort of transparent survival game could be attached to or it could be melded with roguelike mechanics, but it's not really The Last of Us's responsibility to satisfy that.
Yeah,
because it's a very performance.
It felt like this was a review for another game, and then it made it into The Last of Us.
Mm-hmm. Sort of like reviewing the idea of the game, how the game measures up to their idea of the game, rather than the product itself.
Mm-hmm. All right. So that was the last one. So that was They said what? I know you guys didn't get a chance to play the play the other one, but you've listened to it.
I'm a fan of this
it's
one.
in your contract. So yeah, if I could just get some live feedback. Is what do we like better, you think? Like this or the quotes, or do they both have kind of their own merits?
Yeah, I think we could switch off between them. So sometimes we get this, and the next we get the other game. Get some variety in there.
Yeah, I think maybe the quotes game is more intuitive for participants. However, I think this game is incredibly distinct, and I'm someone who constantly sort of scours Metacritic and various review sites, and I like the idea of reviews opening up conversations about games that maybe aren't immediately spoken. So in that regard, I really like the game.
That's kind of what I wanted to do, and I feel like we did accomplish that. Was we got into some conversation that was a little bit that could kind of trail off, and we could talk about maybe not as much the game, but the criticism in general.
Yeah, because
since we are critics.
I think there's a bit of a disconnect with a lot of people freaking out if a game gets a negative review, a review they disagree with. Whereas I've always obviously some reviews can just be misleading, but I've always tried to perceive the purpose of a review to be just opening up a conversation about a title.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. All right. Well, that was that game. Hopefully we can continue that in another episode.
Yeah.
Join next week to see which game it is.
It's like Jigsaw.
Hello, Zach. I want to play a game.
Oh no.
All right. So let's jump into the main topic that I know you guys in particular are pretty excited about.
Yes, sir.
So we're going to talk about some of our favorite indie games. And indie games are super cool. I'm assuming we're going to kind of disallow games that, while indie, but games that are that have been published by higher end things. Like, I'm talking about situation with Destiny right now, where Destiny is technically an indie game now, but it's definitely AAA, and it was originally published by Activision, so that is we're not going there.
Yeah, I think I have a couple of my, not to the extent of Destiny, I have a couple of my entries that may toe a line, but I think I'm gonna firstly go through the ones that are definitively independently distributed.
Yeah, and we'll just we'll kind of get through as many as we can, just kind of take it one at a time, discuss them a little bit. But let's try to get through these. I was kind of gonna have the winner of the game go first,
but we tied.
So this is really disappointing. just
you go first.
Just both of you talk at the same time.
Yeah, and we just pan one to the left speaker and one to the right.
Oh no.
All right, Zach, you want to go?
Yeah, sure. And I guess chronologically that works, because the first title I'm going to talk about is arguably the first fully independently distributed game. It's a very sort of niche-oriented one, and it's from 2001, and it's called Uplink. And it's declared sort of a hacking simulator, but more to the extent of, like, the hacking montages in those cheesy 90s films. Yeah. Pretty much, if that was a real process you could go through, that would be what Uplink is. And Uplink is one I immediately want to cite for a few reasons. One would be context, because it came out at a point where pretty much the only way in to independent game distribution was either Flash games or just word of mouth. And Uplink was one where it was just only posted to the developer's site, like a 20 megabyte download. And it was sort of carried to prominence. It's now on Steam and Good Old Games, merely through word of mouth. And what also stands out about the game to me is nowadays a lot of indie games sort of experiment with being open-ended and sort of allowing players to operate separate from a narrative and work at their own pace. But Uplink was an incredibly intuitive example where there is a narrative going on, but it's meant to be entirely open-ended. You can, in fact, it's a very sort of meta game, because you can sort of go off course of the narrative and find, like, a publication saying negative things about your player and completely just sort of operate out of spite, and instead of following the narrative, hack this publication. And
I love it.
I think it's an early example of how indie games can completely sort of experiment with perspective and structure, and sort of, by using maybe less resources or mechanics, really be able to throw a wrench into one or prioritize a type of gameplay that you wouldn't normally see in a game. Like in most AAA games where hacking even appears, it's like an obligatory 15-second minigame. Sometimes you're only holding a button or just finding a string of text. But Uplink is very much a game that seeks to make you feel like a sort of the incredibly dramatized rendition of a hacker. And the fact that the game, in its simplicity, still has a pretty decent following online 18 years later, I think is definitely a testament to it being a landmark title, a landmark indie game that was also about as indie as it got.
This sounds like a game, it's on Steam, like you said, and I'm looking at it right now, but this is definitely a game I'd like to play.
Yeah.
This looks like something you could, forgive my habits, but sit back with a bag of chips and just kind of chip away at, have a nice time, kind of enthrall yourself in it for a few hours at least.
There are very little strings attached to it, beyond just sort of playing around and experimenting with the mechanics.
Yeah, that looks cool.
Yeah.
All right, Max, you got one for us?
Oh yeah, I want to go a bit more recent. This was within the decade. It's Rebel Galaxy by Double Damage Games. I reviewed it for the site a little while back. I think that was actually one of the first reviews that went up before the site, after, or it was around the same time the site formally launched. And I've people who know me for a bit longer know I'm super into space games. So a game where you're basically just flying around a semi-abandoned, kind of like Wild Western in space area, just in a spaceship, working your way to the top. It's so much fun. There's a sort of karma system, so you can ally yourself with a civilian in the military, or you can align yourself with like a sort of gang faction, or you could just try to keep yourself in the middle, do missions for both, act as a perfect mercenary. There's a really fun progression system. You got, like, you start out on a really small ship that feels like it's made of paper. How you get shredded, but you can like quickly get up to basically tanks, or you can stay small and speedy, sort of get around faster. So everything changes depending on your play style.
Yeah.
And even like the kind of like, I guess you could call it grinding, but like the side missions are still really fun. They're like, you can find them pretty much anywhere. You just pick it up if there's a task, like you got to go fight something or you got to go find something. And since you're just flying around in a spaceship, almost like pretty much everything you do is just fun.
Mm-hmm. I think that the great thing about sort of the deceptive simplicity of indie games is a lot of them can just sort of capitalize instead off of being compulsively playable.
Oh yeah.
Like, it's a lot of games. I haven't played Rebel Galaxy yet, but a lot of indie games, through the fact that they don't formally end, sort of lend themselves to an extensive, near infinite experience.
Yeah, it does have like the story mode, but it's like you can ignore it for a little while if you want. You do have to, like, after you get about halfway through, you can go just about anywhere you want, and then once you're finished with it, you can keep flying around and causing as much chaos as you want.
I think another thing.
There's actually there's some like really interesting evil potential there, because systems will have various emergencies. Like there'll be somewhere like there's a food shortage, so someone will send a supply ship there. But as long as the food shortage is happening, you could sell food for more. So if you wanted, you could raid the supply ship, take all the food it was supposed to bring, and sell it to the system for massive profit. So there's a lot of evil you could do there if you want.
You're the space capitalist.
Oh yes.
I think another thing that indie games, like to add on to what you were saying about their replay value, just the fact that most of them are pretty short and straight to the point makes them a lot more inviting to go back and try to find a different path, or maybe just experience the same path again. Because it's so easy to just be like, yeah, I got a couple hours.
Yeah.
And just do it. Whereas, like, I don't know about you guys, but I am not going to be replaying the entire Red Dead Redemption 2 story anytime soon.
Yeah, there's a sort of instant gratification offered by a lot of independently developed games that are able to center in on a mechanic that is like, this is the purpose of playing the game. That I think AAA games that sort of have to take on so many mechanics and set pieces and environmental details, it can get a little bit impenetrable almost.
And it really gives that opportunity for indies to be super original. I mean, you see so many really cool mechanics that you would have never thought of.
Yeah.
And that most AAA studios would have never thought of, because what I've come to see is that indie games are all about okay, what can we do that's different? But then when you start to get into AAA, it starts to become a little more money centered. Anywhere from a little more money centered to all about money.
Yeah.
And then what happens is it becomes less about let's try something new and more about let's find the formula that works.
Yeah.
And
And
I think that's something that Rockstar does, that they have found a formula for their games, and it works really well. And they still produce really good games. I don't think they're particularly money hungry. I wouldn't consider them a super money hungry business, but definitely more about that formula. Let's see what and then their experimentation comes through the narratives and the characters.
Yeah. Well, I think really in a lot of different fields, sort of a constraint on resources fosters more creativity, because if you have millions of dollars in mind, it's like you can do anything, but for a developer that sort of becomes engulfing.
Right. Yeah, when you have those money constraints, you really have to start thinking creatively about, okay, how can I accomplish what I want to on as little money as possible?
Mm-hmm.
And then that's where you start to find those gems where it's like, man, what a great idea.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Well, my undisputed pretty much favorite indie game is Overcooked.
Oh,
And that's mostly just because I love a game. Whenever there's a game that I can play with my friends and just have a good time and not have to worry about anything else other than just having fun. That is a game that is always going to be special to me, and I think that's what Overcooked brings to the table. It brings an idea of okay, how can we take something like cooking? All right, now how can we make it crazy? How can we make it different? And then they throw in these ideas of these different maps that can change throughout, and these these different ways that you have to interact with the people you're playing with, how you have to kind of use and this is the big one for me. You have to use the map a lot of times and where you're cooking to figure out, okay, how are we going to organize this? And it usually turns into mass freaking chaos, which is always going to be fun to play.
Yeah, I was about to say that I think it's sort of understated how cooperative play or local multiplayer in general can sort of immediately increase the how fun a title is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
oh yeah, Zach and I recently played through Rabbids Go Home, and we have a throwback review on that for the site, but it was just a lot of fun. Even as the second player, where I wasn't doing much, it was just fun to see everything play out and like joke about how absurd the game was.
Yeah, I've found that even games that you wouldn't consider co-op at all, like I had a great time with my friend not too long ago. He had never played The Last of Us, and so that was a fun title, even though it's totally single player. It was so much fun to just sit there and kind of experience it again with someone else.
Yeah, and there's sort of
fresh eyes.
There's sort of a joy of getting together that carries no price tag and can already be sort of a leg up for a title in terms of how enjoyable it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think that's something that Overcooked really captures.
Yeah.
Really not only captures it, but it's like it's pretty much the center of it. It's almost like cooking is an afterthought in the game. It's something that you're also doing, but the main thing you're doing is just being with your friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that adds a lot of forgetting about objective quality, of course. Just enjoyment out of your experience.
Yeah. Well, That may it may be odd then that'll lead us to me discussing an incredibly misanthropic indie title, Hotline Miami, which does nonetheless share sort of the component of efficient mechanics, really taking a game to sort of the stratosphere. Because where Hotline Miami, where it really sort of distinguishes itself is the sort of seedy, psychedelic aesthetic permeating all of it, from graphics to environment design to soundtrack. But I think what's even more important is that it's grounded in such gratifying sort of isometric mechanics. This is sort of a backhanded statement because I'm a fan of Suda51's work, but I think that over time, I've sort of become more of a fan of the idea of Suda51 than Suda51's work, because the sort of mechanics just don't hold up compared to the sort of aesthetic that's matched around it. And I think where Hotline Miami sort of excels is that above all, it's a very sort of instantly satisfying title to play. It's sort of simplistic top-down approach really allows them to fine-tune sort of the AI and the feel of the combat, which is most important to an interactive title. I would say 99% of the time.
Yeah. I can't speak too much about it. Hotline Miami is one that I've at the very most heard of.
Mm-hmm.
But when did that game release?
That would have been it was definitely the 2010s, but I can confirm it.
Is that one that was just off my radar? Was that a pretty popular
that was
one?
2012, and it was probably the title that really got Devolver Digital Publishing to sort of gain momentum behind them. And it was actually what's sort of comes full circle with the prior discussion of Flash games being an early example of indie gaming, is Hotline Miami was originally developed in Game Maker, and it sort of retains that sort of deceptively simple, quick, efficient 3-minute levels, just get through, take out all the enemies, get out approach that makes it so there's no downtime. There's no possibility for downtime, which is sort of a component that I think is integral to Flash games and carries over to Hotline Miami, even if it also has, even beyond that, an incredibly sort of ambitious, out there aesthetic top to bottom.
Mm-hmm. I've always thought those kind of Flash game type and Game Maker type games have always had their own kind of charm,
mm-hmm.
which is really, really nice if it's done well. I mean, I guess you could make the argument that if anything's done well,
yeah.
If it's done, I should say, if it's done correctly, then it makes for a really cool experience. Despite, like you were saying, that how basic it is, how simple and straightforward, doesn't need to be anything complex.
Yeah, and I think that lack of pretense allows it to be the case where every moment counts, and it's sort of something where you're instantly on the page of these mechanics are enjoyable and satisfying. All
right, Max, you got another one for us?
Yeah, I'm just gonna bring up another space game. I'm sure most of you have heard of FTL. It's a pretty well-known roguelike. It's very difficult. I've still actually yet to beat it, despite pumping a couple dozen hours into it. But for those of you who don't know, you are a captain of a Federation ship as the rebels are closing in on the Federation. So you're doing your best to escape the rebels, so the amount of time you have on each screen gets increasingly shorter as you try to take down the big rebel ship at the end. And I've made it there a couple times instead of actually managing to do it, because that is one of the hardest final bosses I've ever fought. But it's a lot of fun. It changes every time you want to do it. Sometimes it'll be easier, sometimes it'll be harder. There was like a free expansion a bit back that added a whole bunch of new races, songs, scenarios. There's a lot of different loadouts you could do. Each time you beat the game, you can start as a different species, which will have different perks, a different ship. So there's the replayability is through the roof, and if you like getting your butt handed to you, then this is definitely not a bad way to go.
Yeah, and I think roguelikes have really sort of really shot to the top as a result of indie gaming, because the sort of, in a sense, limited resources allows so many variables to be introduced for how those resources are distributed.
Oh yeah, it's definitely true, because you can get the same scenario a couple times, like in a row. It'll be rare you have the exact same thing happen in a mission, just because there's the sheer variety, and each run doesn't take very long, like an hour or two at most.
And this sort of roguelike movement has had an obvious impact, because even just visible in sort of the Prey Moon Crash DLC, that was at least my first experience seeing a AAA developer sort of invest in the roguelike structure.
Yeah, there's a whole lot you could do with it. There's like my Steam library is mostly roguelikes, I think, or at least a very good percentage of it is. Like not because like I happen to like the genre more than others. It's not necessarily my favorite, just because there's such a wide variety. I think even the Unity engine by default, like the easiest thing you can make on it is a 2D roguelike. So there's a whole lot you could do with it. It's not too hard to make, so they're everywhere, and there's a lot of good ones out there.
Yeah. And sort of the investment time is, like we said, infinite.
Yeah.
Because the game can constantly sort of throw something new at you.
Exactly. And even if you do run into the same scenario, you'll probably have to go around it differently, because you'll have different resources, a different loadout. You might have more or less time to take care of something.
I've been silent because I've been looking at it, but the strategy behind it seems really cool.
Like the final boss, it's like
I don't know.
You gotta completely prepare for the final boss, because it's very hard to like heal yourself during it. It's got 3 phases and will jump around the map. So you have to constantly be chasing it. You'll be under attack, so you have to be keeping yourself up. You'll have to make sure you don't run out of weapons. So even though at the start of the game you're just focusing on survival, by the time you get near the end, you'll have to be thinking about how you're going to go about this final boss.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting that the sort of concept of saving resources is very integral to a lot of these sort of titles, because it's a very far displacement from sort of the power fantasy that a lot of FPSs can offer.
Yeah.
Where, you can run out of ammo, but it's really not much of a worry. There's always that cushion where there's just ammo somewhere on the map. And sort of the consideration of how you're going to succeed is a very sort of interesting addition to game design.
All right. Well, to wrap things up, I'm going to share my last one. Firewatch.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I love Firewatch. First I want to address kind of the biggest issue that people have with it, and it is kind of an issue I found when you're going through it on a second playthrough. Just the nature of a walking game, a walking simulator, is very mundane and boring, kind of, and it definitely it's for a specific, more often than not, for a very specific type of gamer, usually, just because for the same reason that some people won't like a game like Journey. That's just not they're much more into the like enter the gungeon type shoot 'em up games, or they're much more into the really big AAA titles or the first person shooters like Call of Duty. I mean, everyone's got their kind of poison, if you will. But Firewatch for me is a great experience that very easily could have been anything but, because the highlights of it are the small things, like the way the voice actor said that, or the textures on this particular one, or the way the sun sets in the distance and the colors that it produces, things like that easily could have gone a different direction that really make up what's special about the game. Like the story for me of Firewatch is kind of interesting, but it's nothing that I can really get enthralled in. What you get enthralled in is the interaction between the characters. So it's always been much more impressive on that end to me, but it's so impressive in that and in the way that it conducts itself. I think one impressive thing is how it gives you the illusion of freedom because of the really big world it has, but it's not really open that much. I mean, I suppose you could go anywhere you wanted at any time, but you wouldn't really be able to accomplish anything. You'd just be sightseeing. So it gives you this illusion of freedom while still confining you to, okay, we gotta go on this route. We gotta go this direction.
Well, yeah, and I think that games can sit as in a very sort of unique spot for storytelling when realized to its full potential, which I think is starting to happen, because it can sort of unfold at the length and presence of detail of an audiobook, but it still has sort of the visual presence of a movie and the interaction of a video game. So I think that as long as the mechanics hold up, they aren't outright annoying to use, as long as the story or even just enough individual moments lend it some sort of narrative personality, that there's surely a more narrative-oriented game experience that is beginning to be mined and should continue to do so.
Yeah, you look like, it's kind of to go along with what you were saying there, you kind of look at games like Quantum Break. Have you guys played that or seen that at all?
I have not, but I know of the general structure of it.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
It's got combat, but the combat is very clunky, and clearly was not the center point of the game and wasn't what they were what they wanted to focus on, really. The big thing is they wanted to tell this story with these characters, and they wanted to do that so much, in fact, that they created something which, I mean, it could go either way in terms of criticizing it, but I really liked it. The way they created a television show almost within the game, where you get these live action scenes that are not scenes, but all of these live action moments that are like 15 minutes long. So you play for maybe an hour or something, and then or 2 hours, and then you get to just sit back and kind of learn more about the characters and the story. And there are very few people, I think, that would be able to frankly stand that in a video game.
Yeah.
Being able to just sit there and watch it as if you're watching TV, because if you wanted to watch TV, you'd be watching TV.
Yeah.
But you want to play a game.
But in the indie sphere especially, I think there's a lot of opportunity to shatter sort of pretenses of a game having to be all gameplay or like 98% gameplay. I think that there's definitely begun to be an opening where games can be a vessel for its narrative.
I think there are very few situations in which you can actually have above 90% gameplay. This is just my opinion, where you can have above 90% gameplay and actually have a good game. And I think the rarities there would be things like Smash Bros. Obviously,
Yeah.
really great game. But where's the story? I mean, they do have the single player mode, and most recently on Ultimate, it does kind of have more of a story to it, but it's still not what you think of when you think of Smash Bros. And then, of course, you look at games like League of Legends or Overwatch, things like that, where it's like, if you want story, you just got to read up on the lore.
Yeah.
But other than that, it can totally more than survive on its own without all of the lore, and just because of the mechanics and the idea of the game.
Yeah, I think there's more than enough room for a sort of split for like multiplayer driven games that are almost entirely gameplay oriented, and then also sort of smaller scale, in a sense, titles that really sort of flatter telling the act of telling a narrative, and really a lot of space in between to sort of experiment with those parts and pieces. And with the indie game industry especially, there's a lot more room for experimentation, because you don't have to worry about investing millions and millions into a risk.
Oh, yeah. All right, well, I think that's going to just about wrap it up. We didn't get quite as far as I wanted to. It makes me think maybe we should do
Another
like
volume.
Kind of a, yeah, like volume 2 of indie game talk.
We should definitely have Sam on for that one.
So, well, it was great having you guys.
Yes.
And I hope you'll join on more podcasts in the
Yeah,
future.
I'd like to.
Because I
Absolutely.
enjoy the conversation.
Absolutely.
We just went for about an hour and 20 minutes here.
And
No
it flew
problem.
through.
Yeah, whew. All right. That was close. We made it. But thank you guys for coming on. You guys, we always like to ask if you guys got anything you want to plug, any social media, things like that.
Sorry, I'm
That
Amish.
people can go and check you out on.
I'm kind of a hermit as well, but I've been turning in a lot of course, throwback reviews for Sick Critic, and recently sort of prioritizing titles that I feel are less spoken of and sort of forgotten. So I think it would be mutually something that I would very much appreciate if you would check out those articles and sort of look into these sort of more niche-oriented titles that aren't necessarily remembered, but can maybe really sort of appeal to you with sort of a distinct arrangement.
Check out my
And
MySpace.
I gotta tell you, Zach, MySpace. I gotta tell you, Zach, I really love that you do that for the site, because that's something that I've always thought, like, man, there's so many games that exist, so many. Like, I would never be able to play all of them. I don't think anybody could ever play all of them. And in the clutter of these AAA titles, you lose some of these indie games that we're talking about.
Yeah, and it's a very forward-moving industry, because generally sort of the flashiest, most technically advanced game is what sort of elbows its way to the top.
Yeah. So definitely check out Zach's reviews on that. You might find your next your next indie game for a couple weeks, or maybe even a month or two. So check him out there. We're all on sickcritic.com, of course. Don't forget to follow the podcast on Podbean. Make sure you're getting notified of when these are coming out, because we have these great discussions, and we'd love to hear your thoughts about it in the comments. We have Twitter, at sickcritic, simple one there, easy follow, and you get gaming news notified whenever a podcast goes up, a YouTube video, an article on the website. Easy follow. and the YouTube channel. Subscribe there if you're interested in more condensed versions of this of like interesting game related topics that kind of open up a discussion. We definitely try and do as much there as we can. So thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next week on Sick and Wired.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for watching.
Whoever's
Bye.
listening.